Okay. Yeah. Um, so good morning, everybody. I welcome you all here after that short interlude of the cold, experience outside. For many of us, it's very difficult to stand for a long time outside when you're not properly dressed. But I just hope you've covered that by having a cup of coffee or tea. Yeah. So I'd like to, on behalf of the GEF CSO network, I'd like to welcome you all to Washington, D.C., and also appreciate the presence of the GFC Chief Executive Officer, Naoko, and Pilar, who's in charge of partnerships, and of course the other members of the GEF Secretariat, my colleagues here. So all protocols observed. It's an opportunity for us every time to sit here and be in the presence of each one of us coming from different countries. I'm not going to go so much into details because I know that all the agenda items have all been will be discussed, and I can only call for your participation, engaged participation, making sure that our experiences do inform the deliberations as we continue throughout this month. So I won't take much of the time, but rather to ask Naoko to welcome us and give few remarks. I understand I should be leaving shortly. She has some engagement later, but we'll still be together with other members of GEF Secretariat and Pilar and colleagues here. Thank you.
Very good morning to everyone, and Victor and Tracy. Yeah, welcome to the council and the CSO network consultation, and a very warm welcome to everyone. We have a small hiccup this morning. And lucky that it was not raining as yesterday, so that then let's recover some of the time lost. It was actually that the first council meeting since we met in Da Nang as the conclusion of the GEF 6 and also GEF Assembly. I remember some of you were there, and we had a quite good meeting at Da Nang, and since then many things have happened, so we'd like to reflect a little bit about what happened since we met in Da Nang. To my side, I think that the one thing which really overwhelmed me is that a series of reports and facts and extreme weathers and an outside world, that there is apparently, a quite strong signal from all over the world that how the environmental degradation or climate change is getting worse and worse and worse by every day. And over summertime, that the scientists warned us that we were really leaving that Holocene, which is a very comfortable period, and also the foundation for a civilization. We are leaving Holocene and actually moving maybe to the Anthropocene, or some scientists call it a hothouse Earth, which is characterized by much warmer temperature and much higher sea level. And you can imagine what kind of world we will be entering into. So that is a kind of interesting report over summertime, and many of us actually read it with great interest. Then since then, another maybe very important report is a IPCC 1.5 degree report, which is basically telling us that 1.5 degree is much better than 2 degree, definitely. But even that is also very difficult world, and in order for us to actually to achieve this 1.5 degree, the entire society needs an unprecedented transformation in almost all aspects of our society, with unprecedented scale and speed, so that the message was very strong that in order to achieve the 1.5 degree, we really need to move to leave the business as usual and to find out a way to do this transformation in almost every key economic system. we were currently having, so that the message was very, very strong. Then that also in the biodiversity world, Living the World, Living the Planet Index was announced in early November, I recall, and according to that report, that we are losing the biodiversity by 60% since 1970. It's a huge, huge, huge number. And the most of the reason why we are losing biodiversity is actually the human activities, particularly the food production, human settlement, and the infrastructure. And these are happening almost outside so-called protected areas. So we need to really find a way to how to harness human activities and pressurizing the earth system. So these are kind of a few reports, and also you can you have seen that we have witnessed that the extreme weathers and fires in California, or actually close to Arctic, and where the some of the fires are not really the areas which we didn't expect to happen. So something very, very strange happening all over the world. And then that another important number is GHG emission. We were very happy maybe last year that it seems that we were able to decouple that GHG emission from growth, but this year this year we have seen actually the 2017 number is actually going up again, meaning we were not able to succeed in decoupling, meaning that to decouple the GHG emission from growth. So that all numbers are getting really, really alarming, and the sense of urgency is becoming really, really, really strong. So that is a kind of very depressing few months, and since we met almost all scientific report and the data, the numbers, and the weathers and disasters we have been seeing really pointing to the sense of urgency. And it's very clear to me that we were not winning a war against climate change and also environmental degradation as of today. So that's a maybe first reflection, not fun reflection, but I think it's very important for us to take a stock that where we are. Then the second thing I would like to maybe reflect with you is that then what has been our response? So on this one, I think that then there are several COPs taking place that we just came back from Katowice climate COP. By the way, I got a cold, so you may hear me a little bit of, the problem, but I hope that my energy continue the last till the end of the council. So that we had just finished the Katowice climate COP, and before that we have a Minamata COP, and we had a CBD COP. So there are important COPs, and we are trying to, galvanize or to respond to those crises which is kind of ongoing. Maybe we can share our reflection later, but my sense from Katowice is that, actually we went there. I went there personally. It's a bit of sense of anxiety and a bit of despair, because I knew that we are not winning the climate war, and it seems we are a bit of struggling that how to collectively get us back on track. So it's a bit of sense of urgency, a bit of sense of frustration. Maybe we should be very relieved that Katowice concluded the Paris rulebook, so that at least we have some agreement of how to implement Paris agreement. At the same time, we all know that we need to raise ambition so that challenge continue. That's a kind of honest sense. One maybe silver lining of the Katowice is that this time I have been more invited to adaptation event rather than mitigation event, and I see much more energy on the adaptation side than mitigation side. It's a very funny feeling, but somehow the adaptation issue has started to capture the political attention much more than before, and I also am very energized not only by business as usual, usual suspect, but this time I have seen that many of the private sector, the communities is already there, but the private sector CSOs are quite excited about the opportunities that on the adaptation side. So I felt a little bit energized by attending those kind of, events and feeling that there are quite committed people that groups that who can make a difference. So that's a good thing. On the Minamata Corp, this time we will have an executive secretary, Rosanna, attending this council. So I will keep it for that show to the later days. And so let me just say a few words about CBD Corp. Biodiversity is always called as a silent killer because it may be too late for us to recognize that we lose the biodiversity to the irrecoverable point. And this number of 60% we already lost since 1970 is a huge thing. There is, when we analyze that what is the causes of those biodiversity loss, it's definitely happening outside the protected areas. So we really need to find a way to arrest those human activities happening in our food system, that infrastructure, that the cities and those areas. One good news on the CBD COP is that there is an increasing interest among the business sector that how we can make the difference. And there is a kind of emerging sentiment that we need a kind of new deal for nature or biodiversity or nature among business people, so that and everybody seems to me that eyeing at the 2020 COP in China, so that if you are able to orchestrate those the energy towards the 2020 COP, we may be able to achieve something which we were not able to do for the last 25 years. So I'm quite hopeful, actually excited to how to seize this kind of opportunity. So maybe actually that on our response to this crisis kind of thing, maybe I also want to mention that it's not really the COP, official COP, but in September in California there is a global climate action summit, which actually that is interesting because it's not the official event, but it galvanizes a lot of non-state actors, including cities and the CSOs and the business, and I see a lot of actions coming together to really address this crisis, so that it's kind of that the things are getting worse in terms of numbers, but also some actions are going forward, so that can we really catch up that the crisis ongoing, that can we are we able to arrest those, and are we able to bend the curve? So we were really at a very critical moment. According to IPCC, we have only a decade to go, that if we choose to save ourselves out of this disastrous world. So let's see how much we can do. And what would be the part of the GEF? I think that the GEF7 provides us with a very powerful instrument to arrest those challenges, because that what we are seeing, I see that we need is actually the need for transformational change, and GEF7 really aims at how to catalyze the key economic system transformation. The GEF is not a big money institution, but the GEF is mandated, and the GEF has an experience to work with those key economic systems. So the GEF7 is really aiming at how to catalyze the system change in food and land use system, how to make our cities sustainable, how to make the sustainable forest management, and how to actually push that energy transition. So that I think that GEF7 gives us a good instrument to be a part of this solution, but we really need to work harder and harder to realize that ambition. When we talk about system change, I want to emphasize that a role of the civil society is absolutely important, because it's not just a government-to-government action. It's really an entire society to be transformed. And I have witnessed that the CSOs can play a very important role in here and there to be a part of this system transformation. That in terms of city design, in terms of the food system design, in terms of other areas like marine plastic. I mean that the CSOs and contribution towards the system change is very critical. And when we talk about particularly adaptation, that your role is indispensable. So I think that we can go together to really contribute to the transforming the key economic system, and also making our society and the economy more resilient together throughout the GEF7 period.
En cuanto al FMAM 7, me parece que es muy importante para este Consejo. Tenemos un programa muy importante para nosotros. Hoy tienen la oportunidad
to discuss the GEF7 opportunity, but also that in the afternoon that we will discuss the gender issue, which is the first time that the GEF Council actually selected a topic for the discussion. And I hope that as many as GEF Council members join the discussion this afternoon. And also in terms of the I don't know why it's ringing. I see warning time limit. So there is somebody asking that I should stop talking. So yeah, but it's ringing here. It says anyway. It's a good call, so I will be stopping anytime soon. But for our work program, there is an SGP and a small grants program, which is proposed as a part of the work program, which may be of your interest. But besides that, there are many of the policy changes we are proposing to really deliver the highest impacts throughout the GEF7, so that we have an enormous and kind of very ambitious agenda going forward for the entire GEF7. And today, this week, is really a good start of our kickoff together to work together to achieve those bigger and high ambition. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Naoko. So, but we don't want to release you just now. Just before you go, my colleague has a vote of thanks to make. Tracy?
Okay, thank you very much, Naoko, for everything you've said. Some of the things that really rang the bell is the fact that there's a lot of alarming issues that are going on, and also the need for engagement, which also has the CSOs also involved. The process at the GEF level is very interesting and very commendable, and one of the things that we hope to see is to have that same kind of structure replicated at country level, and at the places where the issues that are happening is where the CSOs are really needed. We appreciate coming together in conferences and all that, but also having the spaces where the CSOs can engage with at the grassroots level is where it's really needed, connecting with GEF. So thank you so much for everything you said, and we appreciate you.
Thank you very much.
Do you want to open the floor?
Yes. Yes. So we'll move into 45? Okay.
30 minutes.
30 minutes?
Till 10:30.
Yes, that's good. Okay. So we're now on session 2, where civil society participation in GEF 7.
No. Questions and answers. Questions and answers.
Pardon? Oh, okay. Okay. So may I invite questions and clarifications from members of the Civil Society Network?
So the floor is open for questions to the CEO from anybody who's in this room, particularly civil society organizations. Thank you.
So this is a great opportunity. We can interact together with GEF's CEO at the time where you can seek clarification and on the remarks that she did make. Okay. Yes, Lucy?
Am I on? Yeah. Good morning, and thank you very much for talking to us. Maybe I'm just breaking the ice. And I was just wondering, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about GEF 7 and the civil, and then the CSO network role. What do we expect to see or to have an outcome like? Just to give us a little update from the time when we were here up to now.
Lucy, can you clarify you're saying until now or for GEF 7? And are you talking about civil society in general or just a network?
Just to break the ice for people to talk.
Maybe we can just reflect what we discussed on Friday. That's easier. And IFAG, and we had a discussion on Friday and even Saturday that how we clearly seize the opportunity together, because that and the same kind of method can be also applied to the CSOs. I think the important thing is that we have to acknowledge that we share the same goal. It's basically we were here together to basically safeguard the global environmental commons or health of the global the planet, and how we can really see each other that where the opportunities we can find. And my conversation with the IPAC group is that. Yeah, there is one particular program like an indigenous, inclusive conservation, which is kind of really meant for indigenous people to be guardian of the global environment. But actually, the opportunity shouldn't really stop there, because then almost all projects and the program, particularly impact program, have a huge opportunity for CSOs and including indigenous people to be a part of that, because those programs, as I mentioned, is kind of catalyzed that system change, that the food system, the landscape, the cities, and so that it creates an opportunity for a community to be a part of that. And for the last 6 months almost, that we have been kind of engaging with many countries. So we already have 20 national dialogue and another 20 to come. And almost all national dialogue, we had an opportunity to engage with actually the communities and to kind of explore that what would be the role for the CSOs. So that then for the transformation, it's really, I want to emphasize one more time, it's not the government to government action, it's really to how to involve the entire spectrum of the society. And one thing I'm very pleased to see through this national dialogue is actually that for OFPs are kind of empowered to bring everybody on board. So it's not an OFP kind of monopolize the GEF money, but an OFP try to use this an opportunity to bring other government ministries and also the communities and the private sector together, so that if we can continue to do this kind of a way of doing business, I see the more and more opportunities for civil society or community to be a part of that. That is, to me, the maybe quickest way of and the surest way for you to be a part of this transformation, and that is what I would like to really offer to you. So that may be my answer to you, Lucy.
Thank you, Naoko. Any more questions, clarifications sought, experiences? Yes, Dulce? May I say that we introduce yourself and
Yes.
where you're coming from?
Yes, definitely. Thank you very much. My name is Dulce Benke. I'm from Brazil, and I'm here representing the Brazilian Rural Society. That is the oldest entity in Brazil that represents the agri-sector, and we are turning 100 years old next year. So I think my comments, I have a comment and then I have a question, and it's based on the experience that we are having now on the implementation of one of the child projects of the Good Growth Partnerships. And we represent the private sector, we represent the producers in Brazil. And what we have been noticing, not only in this agenda, but in other agendas that we have been working with, is that we need to bring, the private sector closer to the environmental discussion and really engage them, in the environmental discussion, implementation of the projects. And during the process of the design and implementation of the child project, we did that. But from my point of view, it needs to be improved. Because when it gets to the implementation phase, when you really need the private sector to deliver what you need to deliver in the project, they need to be engaged since the design process. And we have been working hard, on this project, in aligning narratives, in aligning expectations with the private sector, in talking with the whole agri-chain in Brazil, tradings, producers, associations, the whole private sector, to really be able to deliver what you're supposed to deliver. And it took us 10 months or maybe more than that to get to this point of alignment, to be able to go to the field, to be able to really reach the producers and say, okay, this is what we need to do, this is our proposal for you, this is how you'll be engaged. But if we had done this, in a more broadly way, since the beginning, I think we would speed up the project and would have results much faster than we are having now. So this is just an example. We work on other projects that we feel also that the private sector needs to be part of the discussion. This is not always easy, especially when you talk, like in my case, that it's agriculture. The agriculture sector in Brazil is kind of not necessarily entirely open for the environmental discussion, all the time. But we're working on that. So my question is, we are working, we are engaging civil society, we are looking at indigenous people, we are working, with governments on developing these agendas, on developing the priorities for the countries, on understanding the circumstances. So my question is, how the GEF, sees the engagement of the private sector in these agendas?
Yes, one other question. Answer this one. It's okay.
Yeah, you can.
You can go ahead. And I was thinking if there's another question so she can class them up. Yes, Patricia?
Patricia Turpin, RFP from the Caribbean. I'd like you to be a little more clear about the OFPs, because what we see in the Caribbean is not a synergy. In fact, it's pulling teeth to get the OFPs to operate together with CSOs. The country dialogues do not take place at all. So you are giving a very positive outlook, and we in the Caribbean do not see this. So it could be one or two countries, for instance, St. Lucia, that recently had dialogues, but the rest of the Caribbean islands complain to me all the time that there's no synergy at all. So I would like, I don't know if it is possible for you to emphasize this problem, because we are not going to move forward at all in country dialogues unless we are all cooperating together. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, thank you. I just want to take that last question first. And thank you for the good input. I think it's a very important feedback. Yes, I made a very positive comment based on my experience for the last few months, and seeing it on the ground and seeing that they themselves kind of empowered or wake up and what kind of things they can do that in each of his or her countries. So things are kind of moving, but maybe that in part of your part, well, that things are not yet moving at all. So that it's a very good feedback, and we can actually digest it, and we can talk to some of those countries and see that what kind of comments are made. But I think it's good to hear from you directly that what is working and what is not working on the ground. So thank you so much for that comment. I just have to say the OFP themselves have to be also empowered very much. So that's also I see that from other countries an example, and then sometimes the environmental ministries are not the most powerful ministry of the world. They themselves feel that they are cornered. They just try to use the limited resources to their own. That they are on the process also moving up and see that to see things much more the broader aspect, and to see that what to be the global environmental issue rather than their own small interest. So I think that we need to have a very kind of longer view on it. But appreciate your comment. I will talk to some of your colleagues. Going back to Dal's question, which is also another very big question. Actually, the impact program's beauty is to really aim at catalyzing the transformational change, which is also opening up the opportunity for the key actors to be a part of the program design at the beginning, so that the private sector is definitely, and the community also too, that are definitely part of the the challenge. And we, the GEF, always want that why the private sector is not really doesn't play a significant part, partly because that then it's going to be too late for private sector to really join that when the program is already designed. So this time we try to see that how we can do the program design together. So if you read that GEF 7 programming direction, we made it very, very clear that we need to bring the private sector up front in terms of the program design and clearly identified what their role will be. So our kind of commitment is very clear on that, so that it's more like how to implement that commitment. For the last 6 months, and I have had a quite interesting discussion in several countries, and I had an opportunity to visit and do some kind of dialogue, and it's absolutely clear that the private sector are very, very keen to engage, and they really would like to be a part of the actions. And so I see a lot of opportunities that we can seize together. But it also needs a lot of work on the both sides. The government needs to be more open. The private sector needs to change their behavior, and we need to work together to kind of convene and create a program which is more action-oriented and time-bound and resource-packed. So it's quite a different ball game. But I really appreciate your comments about the need of bringing private sector much upfront and from the design stage, so that we can really let them play their part. I just met Brazilian environmental minister, who I understand is already leaving, but he promised that he will introduce me to the agriculture minister, which is absolutely critical for us, the GF, to continue to engage with Brazil. And we need to really keep our eyes open that what kind of engagement we will do in Brazil, where that things are really numbers are really getting worse. And I do not want GEF to be a part of this worsening game. I want GEF to be a part of that solution, so that engaging with the private sector is absolutely critical. By the way, community too, so that for Brazil, that engagement strategy really requires a very deep thinking, and to early engagement with the CSO, also the private sector, is absolutely important. So thank you so much for your comment.
Viviana?
Good morning. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I have 2 questions.
Sorry, Viviana, introduce yourself and where you're coming from.
Sorry. I'm Viviana Figueroa from the Indigenous Women Network on Biodiversity. I'm indigenous from Argentina. And my first question is, we knew that there will be workshops or regional dialogues in this next year, and we would like really to have or to take into account indigenous people's participation, especially indigenous women. As you know, in the old regions we are facing huge difficulties to have dialogue with different countries, and it will be a great opportunity for IPLCs to participate in these workshops. And the second one is we have a special interest in the process of the safeguards on environment and social safeguards. This is a very critical issue for us, especially regarding the free from informed consent and the participation and the rights of indigenous people are ensuring these safeguards. And for this, we hope to continue working with you, but of course it's a process, and we would like to highlight the IPLCs and indigenous women has a special interest to follow up this issue. Thank you so much.
So, yes. Okay. Introduce yourself and where you're coming from.
Good morning. My name is Tommy Garnett. I'm from Sierra Leone, and I'm here representing civil society, especially from West and Central Africa, as being the regional vice chair for the IUCN Commission on Education and Communication. My question is of a personal nature. You are the CEO of the world's biggest agency looking at environment issues. So I imagine that you have access to the kind of information that many of us can only imagine. And so when your opening comments give a sound of caution, we listen very carefully. As optimistic, as cautiously optimistic as you are, there is still a feeling that things are not getting better. So my question is, as communicators talking to the vast majority of people around the world that are actually living with the day-to-day challenges, can you tell us how do you, when you, as an individual, what would you tell me to make me feel very optimistic about the future, given all the work that we're doing, given all these monies that we're spending? Thank you.
Going to be very difficult. Going back to Vivian. Yeah, the idea is that whenever we do, or they do have a national dialogue or ECW, that we want to really make sure that indigenous people group as a part of that. And in fact, one thing I thanked Lucy's group is that IPAC really played a very critical role to actually to make comments on this safeguard policy, which we will be actually discussed during this council meeting. So your special interest noted, fair enough, very good, important, and we want to make sure that we will continue to have you a part of that dialogue or workshop. Last question is kind of very challenging. I mean, first and foremost, all the information I mentioned is public domain. I really don't have any particular secret source of the information. And those data, the scientist report, and the numbers are everywhere in the world. And it's more like how to galvanize it, how to capture it, how to frame it. The only thing I did is that I maybe compared with the last few times, I made it much more, frame it more the sense of urgency, because I had a very strong fear that we are really losing the game, that the war against the climate change. And sometimes it's important for us to recognize the scientific numbers. So this is, to me, it's more like hardwired numbers. It's not the disputable numbers, but it's for us to understand. One thing scientists did a very good thing for the last few maybe years is that compared with the first IPCC report, IPCC 1.5 is much easier to understand, because scientists also come to know that they have to communicate better to change the world or to impact the policymakers or the citizens. So they did their part to communicate much better. So it is also our part to receive it, to really think about what we can do. So I see the huge challenge, huge journey on the scientist world. Of course, that the science become much better, that they become much more confident in their conclusion. Then they become, they started to communicate much better, so that now we got the message from science. So now it's our turn to how to act on that. So that to me, I'm a little frustrated that when I see a lot of setback of actions towards the climate change, actions towards that nature, that are we really able to catch up with those challenges and at our with our means. So that's why sometimes I feel a little cautious, but at the same time, as I mentioned, I'm very proud of the GEF 7. We were not the biggest money institution. I think you should know that. But we are really dropping the ocean in terms of the entire world economy. important thing is that now the environment is not really just a part of the world. That the fact we were talking about the entire key economic systems. In order for us to fight against the climate change, we have to change that the energy system. We have to change the food and land use system. We have to change the city system, and we have to change the entire economic model from current take make waste to a much more circular economy. So it's not a small environmental world we were talking about. We were really talking about this entire economic business model. That's why it's wrong for us to think that the GEF is a bigger institution and the GEF is very powerful to change something, at our hand. No, I mean, we are really a small part of the much bigger picture, but we are the maybe very unique institution to be mandated to catalyze those key economic systems, because we were serving for the climate change, biodiversity, and land degradation. We also work for the ocean, water, and the chemicals. We may be the only one institution which has this diverse mandate which covers the entire global environment. From that point of view, we are very unique. But the amount of money we do have is so small, and also that our capacity to really, change the world is also very limited. I mean, there is a lot of number, 100 billion or whatever billion, but what we were talking about is actually trillion economy. So it's not really a number game. It's more like how to utilize this small amount of money to catalyze system change, and how the small GF can be a part of catalyzing the system change. That GEF 7 is all about it. So that I think we should be very clear about what is our role and the obligation, the responsibility, but what is also our capacity or capability to deliver. So from that point of view, sometimes I may feel very optimistic, or sometimes I may feel very cautious. It's because I think we should be aware of our capability to catalyze the system change, but it's only a part of the entire solution. We really can't, control the entire system change. But again, that sometimes I feel quite optimistic to see that whenever I visited the countries for the last few months and see the excitement from business to government to CSOs together to try to make the system change. Sometimes I feel quite depressed when I see the COP and some nations talking about some incredible things. So that it's quite, depending on the which part of the, and the world you are in at some point. But I think it's important for us to recognize that the science, and then understand the science, and then recognize what kind of policy measures we have at our hand, and what is the role of GEF in it. So that so from that point of view, that I'm very kind of excited, or kind of energized that GEF 7 has a very important role to be a part of this delivery mechanism. So I hope that I answered to your question in a comprehensive way.
Okay, so we have 4. So let me start with few, then from
okay, maybe
we can the last will be the last. This one.
Only just one thing.
Okay, but we can continue doing. It's okay. No, they wanted to ask some questions. Maybe just one. It's okay. Just one. Okay, so may I ask if you'd be very, very brief, because she has to go, and for our colleagues, then we can continue discussing when she's gone, because she'll have the Secretariat with us and the Council members as well. So, yes, we'll do it later.
Thank you. I was going to be long, because it's always great to hear the Naoko Ishii talking about the great work of GEF, and whilst I've got the floor now, I also very much appreciate the participation of council members to partake in this discussion. So I'll try and be quick, because I'm always long, but where I'm coming from, I'm Fiu Sara from the small island state of Samoa in the Pacific, and certainly a regional focal point for the network in our region. I certainly share your desire for the work of GF in the globe in terms of all the focus areas that you indeed work on. I guess my first question is really how you really see the impact focus of GF7 actually in terms of where we sit as civil society could help in the work of GF and in terms of the participation of the 18 implementing agencies, how has their work actually contributed to some, demonstrative benefits to actually implementing of the global work of GEF? And the nature of what you have just discussed on the COP of CPD and UNFCCC, where we sit is quite discouraging. We were supposed to be going forward, but I think the net effect is that we are actually going backwards. You referred to 60% of, more than 6% of degradation of biodiversity since 1970. We're going backwards. There has been talk about already crossing tipping points of planet Earth, and that we are trying to also incorporate the tipping points into the issues of sustainable development. Again, it's a big issue for us in just the Katowice, Poland COP. We find it very frustrating to see that, the same countries who actually drive this whole thing are actually sort of walking away from their responsibilities on actually agreeing to a very powerful and effective rule book. And from where I sit specifically on terms of the blue economy focus, we are very concerned at the Pacific oceans, because there is a huge focus now on our oceans, and seabed mining is going to be the biggest challenge in where we come from, and we hope that we can basically address that too, including, of course, our fisheries resources and how we deal with issues of international waters, imposition and pollution, and we are very happy that plastics is actually being given to us to talk about for the agenda of the next GEF item, because it's already a very huge issue, and we hear people talking about the issues of plastics and their impacts on the resources, the marine resources and the fisheries. So, I'd like to get some quick reaction on those aspects, and certainly it's always wonderful to come here and assist where we can as an integral partner of GEF. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think that you have the entire session to discuss that and the GEF7 implementation. That I think that many of the questions really needs a much lengthy conversation with our team and with you, the group, that how to really deliver the highest impact. So I really would like to thank you, and then sorry that I have to leave now, but I hope that you have a very good, fruitful discussion for GEF, the session 2 and session 3. And I hope this new way of doing business of council select one topic and then for us to discuss is a good one. So thank you so much. We'll see you very, very soon. Thank you.
So may I take this opportunity to invite the following panelists to come and moderate this session. Few, Elisara, then Pilaisia, of course, then Edna. I understand the council member from Belgium is not here, Charles Bice, and I don't know if Have Lefebvre from WWF US is here. So if not here, you make do with those that are already available here. Okay.
Good morning. I think we have a bit less time than planned. We have an hour instead of 1 hour and a half, so I'll try to be quick. So welcome to the session 2, and we will be discussing civil society's participation in GEF 7, and our session is made of 2 parts. In session A, we will discuss the implementation of updated vision on civil society, and especially we'll focus on our experience of implementation of the updated vision. And session B will be talking about the evolving role of CSOs in GF7. The session will be moderated by me, Nana Janashi. I am regional focal point of GF CSO network in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, and Patricia Turpin, RFP of Caribbean, from Environment Tobago. We have invited different GF partners and secretariat to discuss the issue, and our panelists are Pilar Barrera, coordinator of partnership from GF Secretariat, Fiu Elizara, RFP from the Pacific, and Edna Captoyo, SGP Indigenous Fellow. So I'll try to give the little background, to give the context of the issue. As you know, the GF has been working with the civil society through the GF CSO network for the last 20 years, and the review of independent evaluation office found that that the work of GF CSO network was important, and it generated significant benefits. However, the terms of references for the councils constitute ad hoc working group to create a contemporary vision for the CSO network within the new GF architecture failed to take the cognizance of the independent evaluations of his findings, especially when stated vision objective was mainly focusing to clarify the network's role, to set out shared understanding amongst all parts of the partnership of the network's contribution in guarding the global commons, and to identify the modality to finance networks activities. So I'll ask Patricia to continue and to present the panelists.
Good morning, everybody. I'll continue from where she left off. At the 53rd Council meetings on November 2017, the CSO network presented its comments and concerns. On the updated vision, the Council nevertheless approved the vision. The updated vision, though, recognizes that strong and active engagement by civil society is fundamental to the GEF partnership. It is a cornerstone of the GEF instrument. Civil society organizations and the public more generally have been a highly valued voice and advocate on a wide range of issues, a source of knowledge and expertise, and a valuable project executing partner. In this session today, the panelists that represent different GEF partners are asked to share their experiences after 1 year of implementation of the updated vision. We want to hear their experiences. What was the impact of the updated vision? The pros and cons of the updated vision. Did it help to enhance cooperation between CSOs and the GEF? Did it contribute to strengthening of projects, planning, implementation, and monitoring, and performance of GEF partners? Are there any concerns that need addressing? And this is what we need to discuss here now. So to start off, Pilar Barrera-Ray, who is the GEF representative, will start off this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patricia, and thank you, Nana, for that introduction. So I know many of you, and I'm happy to see some new civil society organizations also participating in the council meetings. We met yesterday during the preparatory meetings, and I also want to welcome the network representatives. So a year ago, like Nana was saying, the council members approved an updated vision to enhance civil society engagement with the GEF. And what prompted this new decision was, first of all, like Nana was saying, an evaluation of the civil society network of the GEF, which had been our main partner in the last 25 years in terms of engagement with civil society. The IEO, the Independent Evaluation Office, yes, recognized the value of the network, particularly in terms of policy and global level, but it also found some gaps in terms of engagement of civil society on the ground that was not representative by the network. So in that sense, the IEO made those recommendations, and then Council decided that it was going to constitute an ad hoc Council working group of interested Council members to work in a consultative process to review that engagement of civil society, to come up with a more contemporary vision for civil society. And the Council also invited the CSO network to form its own ad hoc Council working group to look at their governance and to also come up with some changes and modifications. I think this one is first, yes. So that's what happened in 2016. In 2016, the ad hoc Council working group that was composed by 6 Council members drafted a contemporary vision for the civil society engagement with the GEF, and it conducted some consultations actually in this same venue in 2016. Based on those consultations, it went back to the drawing board and also conducted additional consultations with the network, but also with civil society. Over 2,000 were called to have those consultations. About 50 participated, and they also had inputs from the civil society network. Then it came to Council with another updated vision, a Council document, and it was approved in November 2017, like Nana was saying. That basically mandated the Secretariat to implement that updated vision, and that's what I want to talk to you about, how we at the Secretariat have been implemented the updated vision that was mandated by Council a year ago. Going back. So what does the updated vision says? Basically, the updated vision statement is that CSOs are, by engaging with the GEF, can provide greater results and impact in GEF projects. Also, CSOs are important because they can build awareness and also engage other civil society and community-based organizations, also country governments, and also provide inputs to Council members. One important role that the Council members recognize from civil society is their advisory role for GEF Council in terms of institutional policies and also guidelines to help formulate strategies more effectively. And that's why just before Council, we have these consultations, and also civil society representatives can participate during Council meetings and provide their views, given that civil society members are on the ground working on the projects, so they can inform Council about what goes on the projects and also give some advisory elements to the Council. The vision also recognized the civil society network role, particularly in advocacy and outreach to civil society at the global level. One important role the civil society network plays is that of disseminating and informing and contributing to policy and strategy development. And actually, the civil society network participates in our task forces and also, as you can see, in the consultations and Council meetings. Now, going forward, the Council in that document establish a few elements in terms of how civil society, in the broader sense out there in the countries, can engage with the GEF. So the GEF will continue supporting civil society engagement at the national and regional levels. So like Viviana was talking about, the national dialogues and also the expanded constituency workshops. Civil society participates in those GEF processes and also interacts with the operational focal points and government officials and also with our agencies. The GEF Secretariat and the GEF as a whole is committed to continue strengthening civil society to engage with the GEF, also to be represented here at GEF Council meetings and also consultations. One important issue that the new vision established is a new way and a new structure for civil society to participate in council meetings. Up until now, up until actually June in Vietnam, civil society was given the floor at the end of each agenda item. Now they're given the floor whenever they raise their hand at any time during the council meeting. So that is a very important change that the vision established, because in that way civil society can interact more actively and more timely in the council discussions. And the other element that the vision reinforced is the participation of civil society in the assembly and other activities, particularly in terms of providing inputs in our policy development and strategy development. So going forward, what happened between November 2017 and now in terms of the implementation on the side of the GEF Secretariat, the first thing we did actually after the updated vision was approved, we met with the Civil Society Network. We also met with the IPAC, with the Indigenous People Advisory Group, and we also invited the Small Grants Program to start planning for the assembly that was happening in June of 2018. So we established a working group together with the network, Indigenous People Advisory Group, SGP, and also with support from the GEF Gender Partnership and IUCN as an agency, and we started planning for that assembly, because there's an important civil society forum that always happens at that assembly every 4 years. So we started planning, and we also created very important criteria, transparent criteria, to select the CSOs that were going to be sponsored to participate in the council and in the assembly going forward. So together with the network and with the other members of the working group, we developed these criteria, and you can find it on our website. And then we launched a call for applications. Again, it was sent to about 2,000 CSOs that we have on our database, but we also invited contact names from agencies, from operational focal points, from IPAC, from Small Grants Program, and also from the network. So the call for applications went out, and we received 344 applications. And based on the selection criteria, we went through a process of selecting 49 civil society organizations that we sponsored to participate in the assembly and in the council. In addition to that, of course, there are other CSOs that participated with their own funding. At the assembly, I think we successfully conducted the Civil Society Forum. We had about 200 participants amongst civil society organizations, but also indigenous peoples, women's groups, and also agencies and government officials that participated in that Civil Society Forum. It took place on the 26th of June in Vietnam. And one important outcome of that Civil Society Forum is that some case studies were presented by the civil society organizations, and they expressed and they brought some experiences from their participation on the ground, particularly in terms of their experience in building partnerships with other sectors as well, in terms of the impact of these partnerships to bring about the conservation of biodiversity and also the fight against climate change and so on. Those experiences are now in the platform that IUCN has, that is called Panorama Solutions. So you can find it, you can Google it, and you will see some of those experiences that we presented, that CSOs presented at the forum. Between the forum and now, We have continued disseminating information and also strengthening capacity of CSOs. And we have also, so once the assembly finishes, then we're also started gearing up for the next council meeting, which is this one where you are. We continued with working with the network, with IPAC and Small Grants Program in defining the agenda for today, and also in selecting the CSOs that were going to be sponsored. So this is the first time actually that we have consultations where other CSOs, in addition to the network, are participated. And I'm very happy to see many of you that are new to the GEF, but you have very good experiences that you're going to be talking about today. There is a good bias, like I said yesterday, because there's a good bias in terms of indigenous peoples and women as well, given that the topic of that Council decided for to be treated this afternoon, in the consultations is connecting gender and environmental impact. So that's something that we're going to be discussing this afternoon. Finally, and this is my final slide, next steps, we're going to continue building a strong database of CSOs that particularly those that are implementing and executing our projects or that are beneficiary of our projects. So we're going to continue be reaching out to operational focal points, GEF agencies, the GEF Civil Society Network, IPAC, and Small Grants Program to continue building that database. We're going to continue disseminating and providing capacity building for CSOs, providing engagement of CSOs in our country support program activities like the national dialogues and the expanded constituency workshops. Continue also monitoring the implementation of our policies on stakeholder engagement and gender that were approved a year ago, and building up to the 56th Council meeting and GEF consultation with CSOs. One thing that I wanted to do, if I may, is just open the floor, because another change that happened with this updated vision is that 6 months in advance, Council members choose a topic, select a topic that they would like CSOs to address during the consultations, because it's of interest to Council members, because it's of interest to the GEF, and they want to hear civil society providing input to those topics. 6 months ago, the topic was gender, and we're going to talk about this afternoon. We are putting together a proposal for the next 6 months, for June 2019, 2 topics. One is illegal wildlife trade, given that that really affects indigenous peoples and CSOs on the ground, community-based organizations, communities in general. And the other topic is plastic pollution, because there are a lot of solutions that have been implemented by civil society and community-based organizations. So those 2 topics are being presented to this Council meeting, and Council will decide whether they want to address one of those 2 topics, maybe both in the next Council in June, consultations in June, or a different topic. So what I wanted to open the floor for the next 2-3 minutes is to hear from you, what topics do you think Council members could select for in a year's time? So for December, hopefully November, I don't remember now, November, December 2019. Think about this, and maybe later you can give us some ideas, because we also want to suggest those ideas for Council, but also with inputs from civil society. Thank you.
I will just add, but that yesterday I think we had a special working group who were working on the themes, great. And I think we'll have a even statement on this.
Oh, that's great.
Reflecting your question. Yes.
Thank you, Nana.
Can we give questions, or you leave?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Since Pilar is leaving, I think we can.
No, this afternoon.
Okay, you are staying for the. Yeah.
Okay, we'd like to have now Few Elisara from the RFP for the Pacific. He will speak to us now. Okay? Make a presentation. Thank you. We'll have questions at the end after everyone has spoken. Okay?
Thank you very much. Welcome everyone, more particularly the Council members. It's certainly great to see your interest in the fact that we have been all the time being talked about as a very key and integral player as a GEF partner, and certainly your contribution to our work is hugely invaluable. And of course, everybody else who's here, implementing agencies and the rest of the GEF partners. I actually have prepared a paper, and I hope that it's circulated. There's 5 pages of it, but I won't be actually reading that paper, except that I will talk to it. And my job has been made much easier with Pilar talking about the background of the updated vision. And I will try and not only give a very short background in terms of where we sit and how we perceive the updated vision in terms of its implementation in the last year, and then perhaps looking at the 6 recommendations that were made so that we can adequately address our issues there. I must, point of clarification, my comments is steeped as a member of the network, CSO network, although it needs to be clear that the updated vision does actually include others who are outside the members of the network. So we have gathered quite a lot of information from our own members, and of course some of the people who are not members of the network, to actually develop the paper that I hope that will be circulated. There's 5 pages of it. But the background is clear. I mean, we have been part of the GEF in terms of this instrument right from the start, and also being targeted as a key important player in terms of a partner, equal partner in the implementation of the GEF work. And indeed, where we sit at the country level and project level, we certainly have a great role to play, and sometimes, unfortunately, we raise issues at the country level, and our governments are not very happy with us, and we are being targeted by not only them but also implementing agencies as whistleblowers. But we like to be whistleblowers as long as we are raising the voices of the impacted, targeted beneficiaries in these programs. But certainly, when our own network was actually a council very clear decision in '95, set up the network, of course, and the network itself from the past up till now have worked very hard to actually get themselves into a structure that will be very useful in terms of not only playing its role in transferring the experiences of the projects at the country level and the project level. And then we have to organize and select regional focal points representing about 19 constituencies to come here to the council to actually basically relay those concerns and some of the benefits that we need to share with the council, because the council members are not always on the field, but certainly the messages that we bring from the voices of the communities that are benefiting and actually targeted in GEF work, sometimes very welcoming in terms of the sense of the council decisions and their deliberations in these GEF council work. So we certainly want to play that role. And indeed, when the network was set up, we actually engaged in that, as Jeff Sheikh knows very well. Of course, any updated vision is welcoming, because sometimes you certainly need to address the gaps as Pilar was alluding to earlier. And of course, this updated vision, for us in the network, we are still questioning the wisdom in actually the review, and some of the things that we are seeing, and the problems. I guess it's early stage to actually make a proper review of the changes that are being made in the review. There are certainly some very positive elements of the review, as Pilar has actually alluded to. But maybe the other issues that I will touch on will actually bring some more light in terms of how we sit as we view this in the last year, because it's still early days. But of course, the work of the ad hoc working group that was selected by the council was very important. We certainly have some concerns in the process in terms of it being inclusive in the engagement of us in terms of developing the updated vision. And I mean, we have actually registered those formally in not only the 53rd Council meeting, but also in other correspondence where our own chair was actually relaying some of the concerns to the grievance mechanism of GEF. And we hope that they will be reflected as part of this very important review as we move forward. So with those initial remarks, I think it's probably useful now for me to go straight to the recommendations and some of our assessment in the last year. In the interest of time, I'd like to go straight to the recommendations, and indeed want to invite, just like what Pilar was saying, the comments from our colleagues here today, especially those who are non-members of the network, because we certainly need to hear more views from those who are not yet part of the network and are selected by the Chief Secretary to come to these meetings. But in terms of recommendation one, it was supposed to provide continued support of civil society engagement at the national and regional levels. For us, we find that despite this laudable intention to engage CSO consistently during upstream consultations in each participant country regarding programs and project proposals, the expectations that the GEF can remotely manage this process as part of the country program is perhaps unrealistic and rather ambitious in our view. And unless there is some mechanism to obligate our own countries and implementing agencies who are key players at the country level and project level to adequately and meaningfully comply with this laudable recommendation, it will not work. And unfortunately, in the last year, there has not been any changes to reflect that. In terms of countries and implementing agencies being central to GEF national and regional work, we hope that we can together own this vision and commit to its acknowledgement that a strong and active engagement by civil society is fundamental to the GEF partnerships, a cornerstone of the GEF instrument, and it's set up in a number of GEF policies and programs. And we are considered as highly valued voice on a wide range of issues, a source of knowledge and expertise, and indeed a valuable project executing partner. And we hope that we can together genuinely and sincerely own that vision, that recommendation. Most, if not all, from where we sit at the country level on implementing agencies, they do have their own policies for engaging stakeholders. And experience in the project level have been, in many cases, rather disappointing in terms of the compliance issues. Often when we raise legitimate compliance concerns at the country level, we are unfortunately, as I said earlier, treated by not only governments but agencies as whistleblowers, rather than being treated as a valuable voice in terms of our collective responsibility as GEF partners in implementing and ensuring that there is quality and successful outcome in the implementation of GEF work. Our small grants program certainly has been shown a lot of positive, and the case studies that were shown in Vietnam, they certainly show that. And as of course, the one of the GEF Assembly, when the IEO, the Independent Evaluation Office, basically proved that one of the most successful components of the GEF work is the one that are implemented at the country level by the small grants program. Unfortunately, some the implementing agencies who are actually housing the small grants program, they house this in their own offices, which fail the capacity building component, an element, very important focus for civil society themselves to actually manage, own the resources, and actually own the results of the programs. So we need to look at that and see whether it is time to actually outsource those to be owned by and managed by the CSOs themselves. In many national steering committees, they are basically dominated by government representatives and officials, and therefore we certainly have some concerns in that and hope that in this review, as we move forward, there is indeed some genuine consideration that this indeed are supposed to be driven by the civil society themselves. On the second recommendation on continued strengthening of civil society to engage with the GEF, we find this is a very, very useful recommendation in the vision, and of course the intent of GEF is very, very most welcome. The opportunity to participate in key processes of GEF, not only assembly, the CSO forum, the replenishment works, and all that. But however, these we feel that expected opportunities cannot materialize without sincerity in terms of treating CSOs as a real integral key partner of GEF in terms of the council will and of course providing adequate resources, because the expectations to actually deliver are quite huge, but the commensurate resources are not there. I mean, as sitting here as a regional focal point for the Pacific, for example, I find it quite I'm questioning myself whether I am able to legitimately share the concerns of my constituency, because there has not been any resources to actually galvanize the views of these constituencies to prepare to come to these meetings. So we hope that that can be also addressed. It's not only in the past, in the last year, but I think moving forward. We also feel that remotely GEF-led vision recommendation under a country support program goes against the Council decision of 95 to empower the CSOs to engage actively and meaningfully with GEF through establishing their own network and organize inputs to the Council deliberations. We find, however, that the experience of Da Nang in Vietnam was quite challenging. The CSO forum was very useful. We found that it provided some real benefits in terms of the storytelling approach, engaging all of our civil societies that were there, and of course showcasing the small grants programs in Da Nang. That was great, but the whole issue of coordination of civil society was lacking, and we, as a network that used to coordinate the work of civil societies, were basically lost. And there was this huge lack of coordination and meaningful engaging ourselves to ensure that we provide some meaningful consultations, more particularly to the council meetings. We found it quite challenging, and we hope that this review will try and bring together some of these concerns, because yes, we can only move forward, and that moving forward will have to actually address some of these concerns, and hopefully that this review would do that. I think it's the recommendations and the paper, the comments are in the paper if you find a copy, and I'll just pick on some of the things that I have in the interest of time, because I probably have how many more minutes? 4? 5? Okay. In recommendation 3, the selection of civil society representatives at council, we find that in the past, with the 30 representatives that were supported by GEF Secretariat and indeed GEF through the voluntary fund were useful, but to then find that the new vision is actually cutting down that number from 30 to 15 or 10 is rather a concern to many of us, because the raising of expectations from the notice that are going out about coming to this meeting, you'll have about, I don't know how many that apply, probably more than 300 or whatever the numbers, but then find that only 15 or 10 are selected to come. It's a real hassle for us regional focal points, because our own people that applied from the countries, my region has 17 countries in my constituency, and many of them write to us, hey, you seem to be leaving us out. Why do you actually raise expectations about going, and then you find that only one or two per region? So, something that we also need to look at in terms of don't raise too much expectations when we know very well that we can only send 1 or 2 per region or whatever. So that is a challenge for us as regional focal points. But we find that as regional focal points in a network, and GEF has cooperated with us very well on the expanded constituency workshops at the country level, and we find that this partnership has been working very well in engaging civil societies and prepare them well in terms of the intergovernmental meetings that GEF holds subsequently to the ECWs. Okay, and I hope that this non-members and members of the network can be sorted out as we move forward, because what we find now is that it's actually dividing us. And it's a very sad thing to say that. And some of our own regional focal points have seen the whole network that was set up by Council in 1995 as being redundant. There is no, the real importance that the network plays should, now that everything has been outsourced to the GEF Secretariat mostly, to run. And we felt that the privileges that and the recognition of us as integral partnership has been somewhat very much affected because of what the new vision is doing. And we hope that that can be addressed, because the last thing we want is for us as network members and those outside the network to actually then started to have no coordination at all when we come to these meetings. And it happened in Vietnam that we had some discourse there in terms of how we actually present the communique that came out of the Civil Society Forum to the Da Nang General Assembly and indeed the Council. On recommendation 4, is structure of Council in consultation before Council meetings. This is very important, this preparatory meeting that the GEF Secretariat organized for us yesterday is always very useful. You know, that is the time when, for the first time, we come together as 19 regions of the world under GEF, including the 3 from Indigenous Peoples regional focal points, and we have, for the first time, trying to galvanize our thoughts and ideas and prepare ourselves adequately for the Council meeting in the next 2 or 3 days. So that we certainly respect that with a lot of appreciation. In terms of recommendation 5, I will try and hurry it up, because one more recommendation. Structure of CSO participation during the Council meetings, I think Pilar had already alluded to that, and it's certainly we commend GEF for actually learning from the experiences of other similar institutions where civil society themselves are actually recognized being part of the agenda item discussion when they are discussed, and not necessarily left until the decisions are basically made and as a last minute, okay, the CSO, you have the time to speak to us now at the end. And therefore, this is a very positive element, and we certainly welcome this. And we want to actually commend that the prudence and the wisdom of that decision. But at the same time, this idea of giving us agenda item, specific topic, 6 months or 12 months in advance to discuss, it's great, because then we can focus on that issue that the Council wants us to focus on, so that when we come to these kinds of meetings, we are adequately prepared. But the question remains is, if we are given that one item to actually focus on, we were questioning whether the Council really wanted us to actually comment on the rest of the agenda items of the meeting. So yesterday we had some discussion on that. And yes, we will be providing statements on each of the Council items in its deliberation in the next couple of days. But certainly in terms of the focus on the agenda, that's why we are having a whole half a day today to actually focus on that issue. And we hope that we are not actually placing a specific focus on that one issue, which is good in terms of preparatory timing, but we also hope that we can equally focus on the other areas of the Council meeting. The structure of, finally, on the recommendation on the Council review of how this updated vision is working, I think in some things it's working, and many things, as I have said and articulated in the paper that's being circulated, that I hope that they can be considered. Because in the light of being an integral partner of GEF, we find it quite, we don't really understand why that there are resources being allocated to other partners of GEF, whilst the CSO, with a lot of the expectations from the real work on the ground, not allocated some commensurate resources to actually play that role. We are your voice and eyes and ears at the country level, and we hope that we can work together with the implementing agencies at the country level to actually help and ensure that we contribute collectively on the successful implementation of GEF at the country level. And rather than us, when we raise issues of compliances, we are basically being targeted by our own governments and, of course, implementing the agencies. And we hope that we can work together on that. But I hope I will stop there because I've already run out of time. But if you want the rest of the comments, the paper, the 5 pages paper will help you in terms of what I'm trying to say. But of course, when there's question time, we'll be able to happily respond to any queries that might be raised from the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Elisara, for that very extensive review of the revised division. Thank you. Now we'd like to introduce Edna Kaptoya, who is the SGP Indigenous Fellow. Welcome.
Thank you, Patricia. Good morning. I'm a GEF SGP Fellow, but also the Indigenous Peoples Focal Point for Africa. A new one. Indigenous people have been having engagements with GEF since its inception, and we are appreciating that, and we believe we are key partners in terms of GEF realizing its vision and also its greater mission of impacting the world in terms of biodiversity conservation. We appreciate the opportunity GEF has really been providing in terms of strengthening our engagement in the GEF itself through the Indigenous Peoples Advisory Group. We've had the stakeholder, the guidelines and principles for engagement with the Indigenous people, and more importantly as well, the new GEF SGP Fellowship, Indigenous Peoples Fellowship, which I'm a beneficiary of. So we see those as avenues as well in terms of strengthening our engagement. We also appreciate the new gender policy, and we believe it will provide more space for inclusion and more gender-responsive projects, and also provide better space for Indigenous women and youth as well to engage within the GEF. We took note of the Independent Evaluation Office report regarding the GEF Indigenous Peoples engagement, and of course the fact that it highlighted that the participation of Indigenous people provides for more comprehensive and also cost-effective conservation of biodiversity worldwide. So we see it as a positive element. We also did look at and engage through our EPAG within the new updated vision, and we believe it provides for, it's an aspiration really to enhance collaboration with Indigenous people and also the CSO and non-state actors. And we also as well appreciate the comments made by the CSO network, which we are part of as well. And also to add on that we appreciate that we also have opportunity to engage as Indigenous Peoples Focal Point, because we have that within the GEF itself. We also had, we have made a few recommendations regarding the recommendation that we had in the new updated vision, regarding recommendation to enhance the continued support of Indigenous people to engage in GEF processes, both at the national and regional level. We believe that establishment and strengthening of a dedicated funding mechanism for Indigenous people is an important avenue and can be an opportunity, because this is what we've been pushing for since inception of the GEF, for better access and dedicated funding mechanism for Indigenous people and opportunities. As well, within the GEF, of course, we are calling for, under the strengthening of our engagement in national processes and also regional one, of course, it can provide a space for strengthening of Indigenous people's capacity and also participation in GEF policy or process, the expanded constituency workshop, which our Indigenous people, a few, have been engaging in within their regions, and also within the, for instance, the small grants program, and of course calling for support in terms of engaging in those national steering committees for SGP, for instance. And we believe SGP has been primarily the avenue that indigenous peoples have been accessing funding, of course, limited in scope in some areas or scale, but we believe that's an area that can enable for more inclusive approach and also a rights-based approach and more access, improved access for indigenous people. In terms of continued strengthening of indigenous peoples to engage with the GEF itself, we welcome that recommendation in the updated vision, and of course, we believe it's in line with, it should be in line with the GEF stakeholder engagement policy, and also, of course, we have the indigenous peoples principles under GEF, and also this should also enhance GEF's commitment really to ensure indigenous people's effective participation within the GEF itself, and also it should be in line with the international standards because norms have really changed. The UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, the ILO 169, and noting the fact that since 2012, before we had the adoption of the GEF guidelines on indigenous people's engagement, and we know we have areas where they need to strengthen, like the free, prior, and informed consent regarding the consultation of indigenous people. So these are areas we really want GEF to really look at in terms of reviewing where it needs to be, because norms have changed and we need to be in line with the international standards. As well, noting that indigenous people within our different countries as well, engagement with the GEF, government focal points as well is weak in some areas, and GEF could really, like in the new updated vision, could really support in terms of strengthening that dialogue and increase like prominence of indigenous people's activities, which are really contributing to GEF's objectives. Regarding the selection to participate in council meetings and consultation, of course, we've had a few of our groups participating in the council meetings, and I'd like to also concur with the comments made by the CSO network that also placing more responsibility in terms of selection to the GEFSEC goes against the self-determination of indigenous people, because we also have our self-determination and indigenous people self-selection process, which is in line with the indigenous people's UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. And so, of course, the Indigenous Peoples Advisory Group as well, role here is really important, and that needs to be strengthened in terms of increasing support to the work of the IPAG, and also to really allow for Indigenous people's engagement in terms of participation, and also deciding on their participation and self-selection processes. This can enhance the collaboration for GEF with indigenous people, and also to be in line with the international norms. Structure of CSO participation during council meetings, this is well received, and I think it's valuable and meaningful and a good practice in terms of enhancing participation at the council meetings. Of course, we also welcome the support that has been given to Indigenous Peoples Advisory Group in having their prior meeting to prepare for this session, and also to look at different issues pertaining to Indigenous peoples' engagement with GEF. And we also appreciate the fact that we can influence agenda item topics prior to meetings, council agenda, and we can really have the space to provide our input based on our experiences. So those are a few comments. We'll circulate the inputs, but also in conclusion, I think this new vision should be really provide opportunity for us to provide a more inclusive platform, greater participation of indigenous peoples in this space. And as now Koishi highlighted, we are living at a critical time, and time to act is now, and already people are doing some activities on the ground, and they need to be on board, and also to provide their lessons and exchange knowledge, and also share as well. And I also want to finalize by saying the updated vision as well should look more into the findings by the Independent Evaluation Office, because we think it's useful on this in terms of enhancing indigenous people's engagement with the GEF. Thank you.
Thank you, Edna. Before we move to the second sub-session, I think I will invite the questions and clarifications, and I will ask to identify yourself and mention whom you're addressing the question. We'll collect, I think, 2-3 questions first. Yes, please, Madam.
Thank you. My name is Marita Olsson. I represent Sweden at the GEF Council as a council member. Thank you very much to both of the presenters. Very interesting presentations. I had a couple of questions, actually. I think you mentioned that you were preparing statements for each agenda item that you would present at the council. I think from a council point of view, I think it would be, for us at least, it would be much more productive if you circulated such statements before the council, because I think it's a bit difficult for us to react to the comments and the proposals that you present at the council. So if, to the extent it's possible for you to coordinate statements on various issues, it's easier for us to then have a reaction or a comment on those. So that was one point. And then I also noted that you said that now with the new vision, it's much harder for many of the CSO to attend the council meetings. And I was wondering what the possibilities are for virtual participation if that is offered, because, I mean, this is the same thing for us. At least for our government, we had to cut down on traveling a lot and attend certain meetings virtually and abstain from traveling in the interest of saving resources. So I was wondering to what extent it's possible for you to have, in addition to the physical representation here, to also have a broader virtual participation. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other question? Okay. Okay, Lucy.
Yeah, mine is a comment at the same time, maybe a question. Listening to the presentation from Pilar and a few, and then also Edna, it seems like the issue of selection of participants, especially CSOs, who are coming to both the council meeting and the assembly, we need to look at it. But in my own view, and also believing in what indigenous people believe, is that effective participation is very crucial. And indeed, in the assembly and also during this time, we've seen quite a number of other CSOs and indigenous peoples' organizations participating in this particular process, which I think, in my own view, is also healthy to see people coming in. And looking at the new vision, these were recommendations which were done after evaluation. Somebody must have said that something has to be changed. I think what is very important at this point is to look at what mechanisms can we put in place to make sure that we can look at both sides and look at how we can be able to be a bit accommodative, because I know always a change is something that is very difficult to be accepted immediately. But to me, the selection that has been taking place in the assembly, we saw very new energy, new people coming in, not to say that the old people were not bringing energy, but to see that we could also see new faces coming in and bringing some experiences from the ground, which I think is very important. Same to this time. But I think maybe we need then to discuss and see how do we put in some mechanism that can be able to accommodate what we are really concerned about. Maybe Pilar, you could try to clarify that and see, because I know it's something that is very sensitive for everybody here. And to me, I see like it's a positive move at the same time to have this newcomers who are here. And we are saying that the old can also continue participating. So I think it's very important to look at that. And yeah, I think I'll leave that for the time being to have more questions, then I can come back later.
Thank you. I think we'll start with the first question. Theo, would you like to start?
Okay. I'm in response to the question from Council Member. I don't believe that we are questioning the issue of numbers. You know, yes, we are questioning the issue of reducing from 30 to 10 and 15, but the critical one for us is raising expectations from the notices that are going up there as if everybody will be given a chance to come here. And therefore, the end of result of that is people who are not selected, impose on us, why aren't we selected? You know, there was no message to say that there is no guarantee that all applicants will actually be selected. So we find that quite challenging at where we sit as regional focal points. But yes, if the numbers are maintained in terms of the GEF resources that are available for GEF, for civil society participation at the council meetings, we would be happy to accept that. In how you actually engage more, I think the ECW process is very good. It gives more people at the constituency level, civil societies, to engage. Now we hear that they will increase the numbers per country to go from 1 to 2 or whatever, and that's a very positive way of actually engaging more. And the other one is really when there are implementing agencies visiting our countries, that the government has to be encouraged. You know, they have a sort of, unfortunately, the reality at where we sit, governments do not often entertain the fact that we come to these meetings, and that's the reality. When ECWs come to my region, for example, we find that when we sit in the back, all of a sudden, our government officials come and take us to say, hey, you have to come and sit with us in the tables because we got to be seen to be working together. You know, the rhetoric is quite different from the perception. You know, the reality on the ground is just like that. And we sort of shy away and go and sit with them. But it created some basically very healthy dialogue through the ECW mechanism. So we need, hopefully, that the government can be actually encouraged to actually engage. Yeah, on circulation of our statements, yes, I think that's a very helpful one. We certainly will be. I think our chair and those who were in the meeting yesterday will certainly do that. In terms of circulating those comments in advance so that council members will be able to align themselves when we finally make that formal statement during the council agenda item. And that's very healthy, and I think we have tried in the past to do that, but we seem to have not successful in that. Yes, in terms of Lucy's comment on effective participation, I think that has always been our aspiration to be genuinely consulted and genuinely engaged, but more effectively. And I think these other avenues out at the country level and our constituencies are very, very helpful. And we hope that there are more chances of doing that in terms of this review. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nana. Thank you, Marita. Thank you, Lucy, for those questions and comments. So I'm going to address both of them. And that's a good segue in terms of circulating the statements beforehand. I think it's a great idea. Actually, we do announce who has been selected to be sponsored a month and a half in advance or so. And I have been talking to the network before this new governance committee, coordination committee, that it would be good for the network and the CSO that have been selected to start working on those statements beforehand, not on the day before the consultations, because that, it's too crunch the time. So online, you could start working. I mean, the agenda for council is published 4 weeks in advance, so you can comment on and collect information and input from civil society around the world through email and start building those statements. And then you just have, the fine-tuning when it comes on to the Sunday preparatory meeting. That's just a suggestion for the CSOs. In terms of the virtual participation, so we do webcast, as you know, the consultations and the council meetings. We don't have, however, the interaction, but that's something that we can take a look at, particularly for the consultations. I don't think for council would be easy, but for the consultations, we can look into the technicalities to see whether we can have also, participation around the world. That would be really, really interesting. So we'll look into that, Marita. Thank you for the suggestion. Now, in terms of the selection process, and you who are new to this, the new CSOs, and also some people who have not, you have been noticing that it's been a sticking point. This new updated vision mandated the Secretariat to conduct the selection process. And I know, listening to Edna as well, that goes against the self-selection mechanism and principle for selecting indigenous people's participation. But we've tried to do our best. In what way? Trying to do transparent criteria and approve transparent criteria that we actually consulted with the network, with the Indigenous People Advisory Group, with the Small Grants Program, and also with the GEF Gender Partnerships. So we built this based on the updated vision. The updated vision has minimum criteria, but based on that, we also elaborated on more detailed criteria based on the agenda items of the Council and also the agenda for the consultations. So based on that, we launched the applications, we asked questions from the CSOs, and then based on their answers, we select the 20 spots. It's not 10 or 15. 20 spots in this occasion. For assembly, we had, like I said, 49 or 50 spots. So it's not a few spots. Now, there are different levels of participation. One is Council, which is, it's the governing body of the GEF. Then we have the ECWs and the national dialogues and other activities where I think national and regional CSOs can also be open to participate. For the first time, I want to announce something that for the next round of 13 ECWs, Expanded Constituency Workshops, we will have 2 CSO members per country. So we are expanding that. So we're not restricting the participation, we're trying to expand it. We're just kind of moving things around. Instead of having 32 CSOs participating in Council, we would see that many of them would just, what are we doing here? So we want to be more focused and more selective based on the transparent criteria, but also expanded for the Expanded Constituency Workshops. So having more participation at those levels. And thank you, Lucy, for those words about, the support of the selection process, because it has been a sticky point, it's difficult. But until now, the 17 regional focal points of the network would always participate in all the council meetings. It was actually you did say that word, privilege, to be here. But now, some regional focal points are here, but also some new blood, some new members bringing the voices from the ground. And I think that is a good development. We're continuing collaborating with the network very closely, but also we're giving the opportunity to other CSOs to bring their voices to these meetings. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Unless there is a crucial question, we'll move to the second sub-session. Okay. So then we will invite the panelists, Sara Wyatt, Saida Naigaga, Yoko Watanabe, and Giovanni Reis, please. Okay, we have around 45 minutes. So, the second sub-session will discuss the evolving role of CSOs in GF7, and we have representatives of GF Secretariat. This is Sara. We have from GF CSO Network, Saida. We have the representative from Sgp, Yoko, and Giovanni is also here from IPAC. I think we'll start with the Secretariat, Sara. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. My name is Sara Wyatt. I'm a biodiversity analyst for the GEF Secretariat. I also work with our Indigenous Peoples Advisory Group. And I was asked to offer some reflections and thoughts on how CSOs can be engaged in GEF 7 or moving forward. I think a lot of what I would have talked about has already been stated, talking about there are a number of different points, whether it's coming to council, participating in the expanded constituency workshops, the ECWs, which as Pilar mentioned, there are going to be 2 CSO slots for every country in our new way that we are structuring the ECWs. There's also the process that the GEF supports the national reporting for all the conventions that we respond to. So those processes around collecting information and setting national plans, such as the NBSAP, the National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plans, things like that. Those are all processes that are available, as well as ongoing projects and processes. And those are all, a lot of that information is available on the GEF website. I don't really like to point people and just say, hey, look at our website, the information is there. But at the same time, the GEF has hundreds of projects, and only small fraction of those are going to be relevant to most individual CSOs, as what is going on in your country is what you're most concerned with. But I did reflect on what are some things that can help improve engagement from CSOs. And one of the things that, and I discussed with some folks thinking about it, is when CSOs can demonstrate a track record of results. And so when you can come and talk about what you have accomplished thus far, you will get people's attention. And I think it's also important to think about the time that is spent, some time on communications. So you may be doing great work, or groups are doing great work on the ground, in the field, and having excellent results. But if you don't take the time to share what you have done with your government, to find ways to share with your government through the media, other strategies, people won't necessarily know about it. And I would also reflect if you can, talk about things in the language that they kind of need to work in. So you might try to look at SDG indicators, or the targets under the SDGs, and what SDGs are you working towards? The governments have made these commitments under the SDGs, or they've made commitments under the various conventions. So trying to make sure that how you're describing your work aligns with the same commitments that they have made. And then one of the lessons that I've learned here is kind of building relationships before you need them. So trying to find ways to make those connections, inviting a government official to some event or some launch or something like that, so that you're building that relationship. They're aware of who's out there and what they're doing. And then they know that know about your work. And then when you come with an issue, with a problem, you already have some sort of relationship. So before you need to come to them and say, here's what's going wrong, here's what's bad, there's already a positive relationship that's there. And then the last thing I would just say is, I'm available for questions, but as I was reflecting on this, I wanted to also leave time for my colleagues, is that in a lot of countries, I come from the U.S., and we would talk about kind of an ecosystem of CSOs or NGOs in the U.S. And so there are some NGOs that are very activist, and they are out there on the environmental realm, and they are out there calling out government. They are naming and shaming. They are, doing dramatic things to get the attention of government. They are not the same NGOs that can go in and sit down with government and really necessarily work very constructively. And we need it. You kind of need both, right? So the groups that are out there calling out, especially also companies and governments, aren't always the ones that can then go and sit down and say, okay, well, here's your plan. You know, how are we going to change the problems that you have? And so I think it's, you know, it's important to think about what that might look like for yourselves, is that sometimes it's going to be hard. You know, you're going to have a hard time if you want to be the institution that's out there calling out government. And that's a very important role. You might have a hard time, you know, again, you're not going to necessarily have a positive relationship, but that might be the work of other people or other groups. So just thinking about that, you know, that's a thought from the where I come from, as far as kind of how things have evolved with a fairly developed CSO sector, right? Mm-hmm. So with that, I think many people have covered a lot of the opportunities actually for CSO engagement. So I'm going to kind of leave those and leave time for other folks to comment.
Thank you, Sara. Very, very valid, interesting point. I think we'll go to Saida. Saida is a representative of GEF CSO network.
Good morning. My name is Saida Naigaga. I'm the RFP of the GEF CSO network for Eastern Africa. Like how Sara has said, most of the different opportunities for engagement have been mentioned earlier on by Pilar, and even some have been mentioned by Sara herself. But I thought that I should add on one thing. We were talking about the expanded constituency meetings, which are good, and we welcome the idea of having 2 people from per country on those meetings. However, from experience, I've realized that, yes, the ECWs are good, and they bring about sharing of engagement of the different CSOs. However, at the national level, it's more informative and more inclusive, and there are many CSOs that can attend the different national workshops if they are organized. In the past, we used to have national meetings through using resources from the NGO fund, whereby we could get some money that CSOs would use to organize national workshops between the GEF national committees and the GEF agencies of the nation. And through those meetings, we would share more knowledge, and we would also learn more, and also invite other people who are, of course, not members of the GEF CSO network, and they would learn more about GEF. And from experience as a country in Uganda, through those meetings, we managed to bring on board many civil society organizations that didn't even know anything about GEF, and even the existence of GEF as a funding body concerning environment and climate change and other issues. So on that note, we would kindly request that if some money could be put, more money could be put in the GEF NGO fund, the voluntary fund, that money would help organize those workshops at the national level to make sure that all the different civil society organizations are involved in the GEF work program and GEF 7 as a whole.
Thank you, Saida.
Thanks, Saida. I think we'll go to the Yoko's presentation. Yoko is the global manager of Sgp. I think you all know her. Yoko, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that introduction, and very nice to see all of you again, and some of the new faces here too. And thank you very much for also sharing great notes about the small grants program support to CSOs as well as indigenous peoples, and also women's group in the earlier sessions. So today, in terms of my contribution here, in terms of evolving roles of CSOs, including indigenous peoples and others, I would like to introduce what's Small Grants Program is planning in GEF 7, and how we are building on our 25 years of experience and doing more in the coming years. So first of all, the rationale of having small grants from the early on in GEF was basically the global problems actually is generated from many different stakeholders, including individuals and small groups, and also private sectors and government. So we need a concerted efforts to work on it. And most importantly, the local solutions that come from the local areas, from the communities, are really important in terms of it's really built on their knowledge, traditional knowledge, and also innovative solutions that can come from the community end and which is relevant to the communities. And we have been proving that community-based approach is sustainable, and we can scale up those initiatives as well. So that was sort of the starting point in 1992 when the program was developed. And I also believe that the CSO role has been really expanding, and also CSOs are change agent. I think Naoko in the early session have mentioned how she sees the CSO's role in the GEF 7 architecture. But from the small grants program side, we also see that working with CSOs and community-based groups really bring in the innovation and also responding to the emerging challenge and opportunities. And you're the agent to sort of translate the global agenda into local context. And that is really important in order for local communities and peoples on the ground to understand what needs to be done and more in a practical manner. And I also think that the CSO role is to transfer these innovation and knowledges to private sector as well as government and showcase what is more relevant at the community level and transfer those at a larger scale through policies and programs with larger stakeholders. And lastly, not least, but CSO can play a really broker role in developing new partnership. The new partnership meaning that some of the NGO have stronger link with private sector, for example, on ecotourism initiative in like Pacific where we have, or Caribbean, we have been seeing that NGO has been a catalytic role in bringing in sort of bridging the different stakeholders and working together further. So with that view, the Small Grants Program is furthering our program now in 125 countries. We have 37 SIDS and 40 LDCs included. So majority is LDC and SIDS, and we consider that our program is particularly relevant to these countries where capacity is limited and the scale of our investment really can make a difference. And as you can see, we have supported more than 22,000 projects in the past 25 years. We have invested over 612 million in total during the past history. And we remain as the same amount. The 50,000 is the limit of the project grant per program. But we also have strategic grants. So for projects that have proven successful in certain countries, we have given a second grant to basically expand those in a larger scale beyond their community sort of geographical areas or thematical areas and expand to larger scales. Also, moving forward, we really feel that the more the programs is focusing on community-based organization. We see that the capacity of the community-based organizations are expanding, and the CSOs and NGOs, the local level as well as international level NGOs, has been supporting them to expand. So our portfolio right now is about 60% NGOs and CBOs 40%, and that CBO ratio is expanding further. And we're trying to really focus on the most partners who have limited capacity and who are marginalized and also remote, so that many other partners would not be able to support. So this is sort of the areas that the small grants will continue to expand and support further, so that most of them have been the first grant receiver in working on environment and development issues. And then in terms of GEF 7 approach, we really have worked together with all of you to sort of position ourselves further. The GEF Assembly was a great venue where people have provided a lot of inputs as well as support. So we are trying to become really a strategic partnership on the ground, bringing in like-minded organizations together and really support community-based activities, not in an isolated manner, but in a partnership where there's many other initiatives together, and I think we can play sort of a platform where we can support further the communities, and particularly the social inclusion element, bringing in women's group, bringing in indigenous peoples, bringing in youth, and also people with disabilities. And also, we really want to focus further on the innovation. The proven methodology and approach will, of course, to try to scale up. But I think what small grants can do best, and where we are positioned well, is that we can test out in a small scale. And once it's proven, the full-size project, the medium-sized project can take it over. And so we have seen that evolution clearly, and it's been documented by the Independent Evaluation Office on that sort of link between the small grants and the medium-sized and full-size projects evolution. And also we will continue with a landscape seascape focus. This is a way that we can show more impact than scattering our resources nationwide. And also enables upscaling and also knowledge sharing among the communities in the same landscape and seascape. And then social inclusion, as I mentioned, continues to be a strong element of small grants. We will be launching our gender publication, the women publication, in the afternoon, and we're really fortunate and happy to be furthering these innovation together. In terms of small grants program GEF 7 strategy is concerned, following the trend of GEF in general, rather than following focal areas, we have decided that we will focus on the drivers of environmental changes and really work on an integrated approach. So as you can see, sustainable agriculture and fisheries, access to low carbon energy, working on threatened ecosystem and species from the community end, and then working on chemicals and waste, including mercury, with a network of NGOs and CBOs. And the new initiative which is being added is the urban solutions. We recognize that our work has been mainly on the rural area till now, but we also recognize that there are marginalized and poor people also in the urban sector, which has been left alone. So working with the sustainable cities, impact programs, and others, we're hoping to expand our work also in the urban areas where relevant. And then in terms of Grant Makers Plus initiative, meaning that we just don't do grants, but also do plus initiative, meaning that by bringing in different actors together, we can really scale up our work and also be more relevant to the government and private sector work as well. So the CSO government dialogue, as many of you have been talking about, the GEF national dialogue is of course important, but on particular thematic issues, like for example, when Paris Agreement was coming along, we supported 26 countries, indigenous peoples, to voice their interests and voice their concerns to the INDC. So likewise, we are hoping that for post-2020 biodiversity framework, we will be doing the same in about maybe similar amount of countries so that we can bring in the CSO's voices and also do assessment from their perspective so that the global agenda can reflect the needs of the communities. And also in terms of social inclusion, Edna and others have mentioned about the IP fellowship, but we believe that capacity development of these groups are very important, so we hope to expand and continue these initiatives moving forward. With that, we really want to sort of balance our grant-making initiative as well as sort of the added value of small grants, and I think those are very important. South-South cooperation, knowledge sharing, and all that is equally important in order to support the communities and indigenous peoples. Although we will make sure that our results are shown by focal areas because we are, of course, GEF funded and have a reporting obligation to the conventions. So this is what you see as focal area distribution. And also in terms of results, this is a new publication that we are launching this week, is the results report of SGP. The SGP has been tracking among the 125 countries, both on the global environmental benefits based on the GEF 6 and now GEF 7 results framework. And then we are also tracking some of the Grant Makers Plus, such as, for example, wait a second. 72% of the grantees in the country have been expanded and strengthened networks, as well as 67% of the projects have had peer-to-peer exchange and knowledge sharing. And then in terms of social inclusion, we have been increasing women's involvement with 34% of the project led by women's group. I know that the Mauritius and the Yemen leaders are here, and they will be showcasing those in the afternoon. And Indigenous people's portfolio is also increasing from 22% now. So this is my last slide, but also we are enhancing partnership. I mentioned about the platform that we are developing for community-based action, but working with, of course, GEF architectures and impact programs and others, we are in discussion with quite a number of them, but also we would be supplementing, complementing with the other funding, like with Australian support. We are doing community-based adaptation work because we cannot fund those from the trust fund of the GEF. We've been working with Germany on ICCAs, Norway on the UN RED and forest issues, and then with Japan Fund on the Satoyama initiative at the landscape seascape level. So we hope to expand those and have a larger sort of facility that can support different initiatives, different activities that are based in the context of your locality. So with that, I really want to thank you again. Looking forward to furthering our dialogue. This is a really important start of GEF 7. We have our project also in the work program, and we're hoping to roll out GEF 7 small grants very quickly. So thank you very much with that.
Thank you, Yoko, very much. Now we'll move to Giovanni Reis. He's representing Indigenous Peoples Advisory Group.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is about the increased role of Indigenous peoples' engagement with the GEF, and I'm sharing with you today the GEF-funded project entitled the Philippine ICCA Consortium's Project in the Philippines. We are truly grateful with GEF for continued support for Indigenous peoples in the Philippines, considering that most of the areas with high biodiversity in the country are located in ancestral domains. And this is precisely what the project is all about. It is mapping these conserved areas because these are the only remaining areas with pristine biodiversity levels. And it recognizes traditional knowledge in the sense that the Indigenous people's knowledge about their territories are translated into maps. The knowledge of people with respect to their territories and their boundaries and the extents of their areas are transformed into maps so that when they use it for conservation planning, it is evidence-based. Apart from mapping, the project also supports the inventory of resources of ancestral domain forests in order to determine the state of health of these forests and to also determine the carbon stocks of these forests. So therefore, we are also addressing climate change and particularly adaptation. This project has given us the opportunity to also establish registries because Indigenous peoples do not have registries by which they can put their documented ICCAs as an information management system. Right now, what we are doing is to submit to the UNEP, United Nations Environmental Program, World Conservation and Monitoring System. We have established the ICCA registry in that in UNEP as a complementary to the WPA, the World Database on Protected Areas. So you have there two registries that complement each other and strengthens our position, and it adds layer to our protection of indigenous peoples. Of course, the purpose of setting up national ICCA registries will take time, considering that this started only 2 years ago, and part of the project is to establish national ICCA registries. The purpose of which is to provide evidence that ICCAs exist and that there is a critical mass of ICCAs in addition to what already the WRI identified as, you know, this 80% of the planet having IP territories, consistently IPs. Of course, the other reason for the ICCA registry is to demonstrate the importance afforded by GEF and afforded by governments in assisting indigenous peoples on the role of ICCAs in biodiversity conservation. It is also allowing us the opportunity to legislate the recognition of the declaration of ICCAs as part of our increased role in GEF funded projects to assert our traditionally governed areas. And in all these efforts that we do mapping and resource inventory, the role of CSOs and government is purely technical in nature. Technical assistance, they facilitate the process. But the decision-making is always with indigenous peoples, because after all, we are discussing here a matter that is indigenous-owned territories of indigenous peoples. We also take this opportunity to welcome the inclusion of inclusive conservation in the biodiversity focal area of GEF7. And we appreciate GEF's acknowledgement of the significant contribution of indigenous peoples to biodiversity. Our perception of inclusive conservation, as defined by our global partner, the ICCA Consortium, is that indigenous peoples are the key actors governing, managing, and conserving their lands, waters, and other gifts of nature, and as desired to invite others to collaborate and support. We therefore recommend that under the Inclusive Conservation Program, the GEF continues support in the form of replicating ICCA models. This is a model that started with when Yoko was still the SG with the IPAG. Continuing support for community learning exchange programs, because we know these are very powerful mechanisms by which indigenous peoples who have been far away from each other would come to meet together and learn from each other's experience. Support for capacity building efforts based on specific training needs that indigenous peoples themselves have identified. It is important that indigenous peoples organizations learn more about how GEF operates, because after all, indigenous peoples are actually implementing many of GEF's targets in terms of biodiversity programs. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all the panelists. And now we're going to open the floor up to some questions. You have 20 minutes. Okay. And would you please say your name and who your question is directed to? Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Zainab Al-Momani. I am from Jordan, and I am representative for farmer women in Jordan and Arab world. I talk about a small grant program. Thank you so much for your presentation. I talk about small grant program because really in Jordan, my country, the program very important for development and support NGOs and social and community in Jordan, because really fantastic outlook for project. And I would like to ask for more support for a project for my country, because my country we have a lot of challenge for water, for example, issues and environmental issues and climate change, and we need more support for this program. And we need 25 years ago small grant program. We need big grant program, because this program really very important. Thank you so much.
Do you want to do more?
Thank you very much. I am Muqdad Al-Khatib from Iraq. I represent CSO Association, together to protect humans and environment. I can see there are so many, positive or successful stories, good stories about the collaboration between the governments and the CSOs at their countries. But my request is, I think it's so simple and presented to the honorable council members to adopt really. The point is, let's set the procedures that would ensure that every CSO in every country should have some kind of enrollment in selecting the project, monitoring them, and evaluating them for GEF. This is first. The second point is, I went through the country profile of Iraq. It's on GEF website, not on UNDP, not on UNIP, not any others, which means it's GEF's responsibility. I couldn't figure out what is going on in my country regarding their projects. And if that would need some interpreter from GEF to explain to me what's going on in my country regarding the project, which means no collaboration at all. Thank you very much.
Anybody else?
Sorry. Thank you very much. My name is Chibezi Ezekiel, representing the Strategic Youth Network for Development based in Ghana. So basically, I'm representing the youth group. And this is my first time in the GEF Council meeting, and I appreciate the opportunity. My question is directed to Sara of GEF Secretariat. When she was talking about opportunities for CSO's engagement in GEF 7, she was talking about taking advantage of national level reporting projects, and that CSOs must also demonstrate their track record in terms of visibility. But from where I sit, I think that it has to be a win-win situation. Here is the case that GEF supports our government, whether it is co-funding or incremental funding. But as I sit here, I don't even know the members of our National Steering Committee on the SGP. And secondly, I don't even know how they decide where the monies should go into. So if our government themselves are not giving us information, are not reporting, and yet we as CSOs are required to also report and demonstrate our work, then I find it a bit challenging. So just as my colleague said, he goes on a GEF website to get information on his own country. Meanwhile, our governments don't appear to be responsible to us. So I sit here asking, what are the control mechanisms as part of monitoring and evaluation? Otherwise, that will raise a concern in terms of how we are going to operationalize our stakeholder engagement policy. So that's the concern I have that I want Jeff to address. Thank you.
Could we please have those 3 questions answered? Sarah, starting with you.
Well, I'll let Yoko here answer the question about small grants program, because that really is, implemented a bit separately. I would say that the information, so each individual project we have an implementing agency, so one of the GEF implementing agencies, and they are really responsible for working with the executing institution to provide information on each of the projects. So I always kind of remind people the GEF is about 70 people here in Washington, D.C. So we are not, the idea is that our agencies are the ones providing a lot of that day-to-day oversight and involvement in each project, because it is not, really feasible. That's why we provide resources to them, and it's not always feasible for us to take that on. But I take your point that it can be challenging to navigate some of our websites, and that's actually why I said I don't like to give that as the answer. Go look at our website. I don't always think that that's the best process for what to tell people, but realistically, that's a lot of what's available, and you should be able to identify what projects are ongoing, which agencies they're working with, both as the implementing agency, such as UNDP or the World Bank or whoever. FAO, I know, is implementing a project in Iraq currently. And then, what are the executing institutions that are working with that project? And then that the kind of monitoring and evaluation controls, we have a standard procedure for monitoring and evaluation that the implementing agency, there's annual reports, there are midterm and terminal evaluations that are conducted, and there's established policies and rules around that, and our independent evaluation office of the GEF kind of oversees a lot of those processes. So I know it's a lot of process, but that's what's, we actually do have processes and policies for all of this. And I'll let Yoko answer on small grants in particular.
Okay, thank you very much for the questions and comments. First of all, on the Jordan's question regarding more support, more resources, thank you very much, first of all, for being a great grantee and successfully implementing the projects. In terms of SGP financing is concerned in GEF 7, we have core resources as well as we can access also to the STAR resources. This was some discussion that happened during the Assembly's Council last time. So I see quite a number of council members here, I'm not going to name, but have been supporting already us in providing the STAR resources endorsement. So we really appreciate that strong support and providing additional finance so that we can provide more grants in the country level. At the same time, we're also expanding our partnership. As I mentioned, there are different governments that has been trusting us and supporting us on many different themes, and we hope that we can further strengthen these moving forward so that we can accommodate the increasing demand in many countries. In terms of the SGP projects and also National Steering Committee questions, all the projects of the small grants is actually accessible through the SGP website. So the full size and medium size are accessible through the GEF Secretariat's website. In terms of SGP, since we have 22,000 over projects, we have a dedicated database, and that is linked in our website. And you can choose the country, choose the themes, choose the years. I mean, there's many things that you can do to see the different projects as well. Of course, we are further refining and revamping our database actually in GEF 7. And so the work is currently ongoing, and the team is working hard to do further on this. On the National Steering Committee membership, until now, we have, of course, the list, but we haven't been posting for various reasons. But I do understand that the transparency is important. So we've been in discussion that in GEF 7, we will be posting all the names of the National Steering Committee, and we are getting sort of a support from each of the country offices. But what I can assure is that we have around 9 to 10 council members, which is majority CSOs in case of small grants. Government is represented, NGOs are represented, women's group and also indigenous peoples in many countries are also represented and forming majority CSO non-government-led steering committee, which makes the call for proposal and also approve the project. So we will be having further sort of transparency and also recognition of this contribution by the National Steering Committee. If there's any further questions, I can also answer. Thank you.
There was a question addressed to council. Which council member? Did you not address a question to the council? Okay. All right. Any further question?
Hello. Okay, great. Good morning. My name is Payang Lifong. I am currently working for an NGO called PIPA, Public Interest Intellectual Property Advisors. I'm very glad to be able to participate in this meeting today and this week. As I had already mentioned in my introduction yesterday at the CSO orientation meeting, I just had the opportunity to go to St. Lucia, work with the a small program grant actually over there, where they just held a very successful knowledge fair, where they highlighted about 81 programs that they had supported in the past couple of years. And the reason why my organization was invited is that we were created by an attorney based in Washington, D.C., actually, who was an intellectual property attorney who was very committed to global public interest. And he wanted to provide access to intellectual property resources, which are, as many people know, very sophisticated and maybe expensive and not accessible to developing countries. So he created this NGO so that there would be a network of pro bono IP experts who would be available to help developing countries and communities whenever they would need IP, intellectual property services. And I was invited because in St. Lucia, they had invested in green technologies. And so they are at a point where, for example, one of their young inventors, who is a very talented young man, has a device that he's going to be exporting to another country. And he would like, of course, to get some of the benefits of his invention. And he would like to patent the invention as it goes out and is going to be useful to other countries and communities that have similar needs. So the small grants program coordinator in St. Lucia was starting to have to deal with those issues. And as I've been listening to the priorities coming up for GEF 7, the fact that there's going to be that focus on, especially in the small grants programs, on innovations, as well as South-South tech transfer, which will be very useful. The fact that there's going to be more engagement of the private sector, in which case the private sector is always interested in intellectual property issues. The fact that there's going to be more focus also on indigenous peoples, and intellectual property also addresses genetic resources, traditional knowledge, cultural expressions that are part of the economic activities that communities engage in. And then also the focus on women and the fact that it would be wonderful to have more women inventors or women small business owners. And whenever those issues come up, then there will be issues around patents, trademarks, copyrights, owning the genetic resources and getting benefit sharing from that. So two concrete issues that I wanted to raise were that my organization is very interested in providing technical assistance, and we are going to try to do that for St. Lucia as a start. And one of the challenges that I'm trying very hard to think about right now is that we are able to provide the technical assistance for intellectual property itself through volunteers. But one of the things that we're not going to be able to do, and that we have usually asked the assistance seekers to do, is they have to pay their own fees. So when you talk about patent applications, it costs money, and I've been trying to think about how we're going to help with that. And would there be funding to maybe some kind of revolving loan fund that individual inventors or maybe small businesses in developing countries, in small island nations could use and access, and then that money could be paid back when they make money. One of the challenges that we have is that, for example, with patents, in many jurisdictions, you cannot file a patent if it has already been used. So if you already sold the invention and that's how you got money to pay for the patent, for example, you may not be able to file for protection because you already used it by selling it. So I'm trying really hard to think about how to address that gap. And I mean, I would be glad to have other people think about that, because in the experience of the organization, working with inventors in small countries is that they don't have the money for that, and it stops them from really protecting their inventions so that they can benefit from their creativity. Thank you.
Hugh, this is the last intervention.
Thank you. Very short intervention. Thank you. One question for Sara, two for Yoko, and one for Giovanni. Very quick questions. Sara, you talked about ecosystems of CSOs, and I was not very clear on what you were saying in terms of activists calling out on governments versus engagement of civil society with governments being more constructive. I hope that you are not actually discouraging the activist nature of our work at the country level, because they are actually supposed to come together to actually achieve the goals of GEF. Because when you start to actually have projects that violate people's rights and things like that, not actually triggering policies of implementing agencies that should be triggered, not doing due diligence, we need to raise these issues if we fail with government, because that's the process we use. I hope that you're not discouraging that element, very important element of our work. Two for Yoko. First, very short on star allocation. Can you get us some guidance on expectations from star allocations? We find it very, very hard because our own government see that as their sovereign right to decide whether they give it any allocation to small grants or not. But we need to get some guidance on it, to how we can help and sort of suss out some more resources if that is the situation. And we certainly appreciate your comment about focusing on drivers and integrated approach rather than focus areas. And I guess my second question for you is really this: how do you measure this plus on grant making, plus initiatives? How do you actually measure that plus in terms of engaging others to deliver on that program? And one last one on Giovanni. You measure the possibility of to establish registries in your program. Whenever you mention that word registries in conjunction with indigenous peoples, something runs out my spine, because in the Egypt conference on COP, one of the major issues was really this whole issue of biopiracy through the issue of digital databases that are being created. And I wonder that there should be an element of caution here in terms of our traditional knowledge, in terms of the biotechnology things that are very complex, and there's no way that we can technically appreciate and understand many of these animals that are coming in our countries. And hopefully we can find some way of adequately protecting databases and registries that have our knowledges in there, and actually some protection on the issue of biopiracy. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Those were some interesting interventions and give me some things to think about. To respond to Fu's question, I was sharing some kind of personal reflections and some reflections I gathered from other people as far as how CSOs can effectively engage. I'm not discouraging any CSOs from being activists. I think that work is very important, and but I am reflecting on the fact that within, at least I would reflect coming from having worked for a U.S. NGO, that you have the ones that are really the activists, and you have the ones that are kind of more in the room with government day to day, or in the room with companies day to day, trying to help them improve. And I think realistically, that sometimes there has to be that division. And so you will see that some organizations don't get up and yell at government basically about what they're doing, and others do, and it's a trade-off. And so that's, you have to figure out how you can build a positive relationship and still, push on things. And so one of the strategies might be a division of labor, essentially. That's a strategy. That is what, so I threw that out there as kind of, it can be a challenge to be both an activist and expect the government to want you at every meeting. And so I'm not trying to discourage that. I'm just stating kind of the challenge that may exist if you get, when you actually come down to how does it work day to day when you're working with governments, and whether, and if you're at a meeting, so if you're at the meeting, you got to, being constructive, being, really focused on the topic at hand and what they, learning to kind of speak their language and what they need to respond to is going to be really helpful. And so, please don't stop being activists. We vitally need that, but think about somewhat your kind of a strategy, which is that's my advice. Kind of, I'll say that as a personal thing, not as a GEF secretariat kind of.
Thank you,
policy.
Sarah. But a lot of us CSOs, NGOs find our feet on both sides of the fence.
It's very difficult.
Okay, thank you very much. In terms of the intellectual property issue that you have raised, we can of course have a side, talk about it. But what I can say is that in terms of our work, we have been already supporting quite a bit of access and benefit sharing projects on the ground, which includes quite a bit of intellectual property rights. We're also working with Indigenous Women's Group here to really advance more on the AVS, both awareness raising as well as coming up with ABS agreement on the ground. So I think there is a scope that there might be an opportunity that some of the groups can benefit from your expertise and your sort of experiences. But just to make it clear, we do provide funding only to the developing countries, CSO and CBOs. So those technical expertise needs to be in a way bought from them to get support on the ground. So we can further discuss, and also revolving fund is also being used in many of these countries where we have saving groups, and using a revolving fund to further entrepreneurship, and particularly women's groups and others utilizing those revolving funds. So those experience we do have quite a bit in many of the countries. In terms of Hugh's question about star allocation, of course, it is a government and the country's decision. And one way that it's being facilitated also with the GEF Secretariat is that there is national dialogue where many different stakeholders come together listening to the different needs and interests. So those are the opportunity where we see that if small grants can be further supported and further be useful, of course we are happy to do so. And also in terms of many of the countries have been asking us, what have you done with these resources for GEF 6 or GEF 5? And those information have been provided from our side, as well as, of course, the national coordinator on the ground. Lastly, on the innovation, on the how do we measure Grant Makers Plus? Yes, it is an area that we are experimenting, and I think we're spearheading from the small grant side. How do we measure this? For example, on capacity building, we've been using quite a multiple indices as well as a questionnaire to the grantees to really examine the capacity, like how much resources you were able to access further based on your capacity built, or how were you able to replicate those, and sustain those. So many different questions has been asked to really get the sense of how the capacity building development has been done. In terms of scaling up, even the Independent Evaluation Office of the GEF is doing a study on scale up, and we have been chosen as example in Mauritius and other countries. And I think it's been a great case of different evaluators as well as monitoring agency looking at our examples. And I think we've been able to showcase by showing the different scaling up through policies and programs and peer-to-peer actually replication at the community level. So we're also coming up with an innovation sort of measuring. Our monitoring and evaluation officer have come up with some tools, set of tools to see how countries have been able to come up with new approach or new to the locality approach, different ways of doing things. And we'll be happy to showcase once we test it on the ground some of these examples, and hopefully others can also test and use it moving forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Giovanni.
Our rationale in setting up this national ICCA registry aims to precisely become a layer of protection for indigenous peoples. It is voluntary in the sense that it is up for the indigenous community to register only the maps that they can provide, and in those maps, including the threats to biodiversity, including the land uses, the past years. And it is also their option not to include the list of species or plants and resources that have anything to do with, for example, pharmaceutical or health. They have that option to put it, but the point is it becomes a guide to national land use planners, especially those having to do with infrastructure plans. If, for example, the Department of Public Works have a plan to construct roads, they are guided by this ICCA registry to show them that there are protected areas managed by indigenous peoples in these areas where they plan to set up roads. So we envision a registry where it is managed by a board, majority of whom will be coming from indigenous peoples communities with assistance from government agencies, for example, the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples. So there, we have a registry that guides planners with respect to infrastructure plans where territories of IP's sacred sites and forest sites are included therein.
Thank you, Giovanni. And now I'd like to thank everybody, our panelists, for their very informative discussion and all the questions. Thank you very much for participating. I'll put you on now to the chair of the CSO network.
So thank you very much to all for a meaningful and effective engagement, and also the panelists here. You've been quite phenomenal. And now it's time for lunch. I'm sure you're, so I'm told lunch will be served in MC Atrium. I'm not the right person to give you directions, so I'll seek for my colleague. Is it all right, Pilar? Yeah.
You go out this hall? Oh.
Yes, so we're going to break now for lunch. Please be here 1:55 because we're going to start the session on gender and environmental impact, which was chosen by council members. And we're going to have a very lively session. So please be here before 2. And the atrium is just walk out this door, go to the right, go straight, and it's to the right. You will hear the noise of the clinking of the cutlery. So it's there.